She stood trembling in the center of the lavish penthouse, tears ruining her cheap drugstore makeup. "Why are you doing this?" Khloe sobbed, frantically pulling her oversized coat tighter over her size 24 frame, trying to make herself shrink. "Look at me. I'm a nobody. I'm just a fat girl who balances ledgers." The room went dead silent. The ruthless head of the Chicago syndicate, a man who crushed empires before breakfast, stepped forward. He gently cupped her face, wiping a tear with his scored thumb. "You are my whole world," Vincent whispered, his dark eyes blazing. "And anyone who makes you feel otherwise will simply disappear." In a city as unforgiving as Chicago, invisibility was usually a survival tactic. For 28-year-old Khloe Anderson, it was just her painful reality. Khloe was a senior accountant at Harbor Point Logistics, a mid-sized shipping firm operating out of a grey brutalist building near the Southside docks. She was brilliant with numbers, possessing a mind that could untangle the most knotted financial webs in seconds. But nobody at Harbor Point looked at her mind. They looked at her body. Khloe was fat, not curvy or thick in the trendy, socially acceptable ways that graced magazine covers. She was a size 24, with wide hips, a soft, prominent stomach, and heavy thighs that rubbed together when she walked. For as long as she could remember, her weight had been the defining characteristic of her existence. It was the reason shop assistants ignored her, the reason strangers gave her pitying or disgusted looks on the L train, and the reason her co-workers treated her like part of the office furniture. Her desk was tucked away in the darkest corner of the accounting floor, specifically because the narrow aisles between the modern cubicles were a tight squeeze for her. Every day, she sat in a standard-issue ergonomic chair that dug painfully into her hips, quietly doing the work of 3 people while her supervisor, a slick-haired opportunist named David Berman, took all the credit. But the sharpest pain in Khloe's life wasn't the ambient cruelty of the world. It was Michael. Michael Reed was her ex-boyfriend of 3 years. They had broken up 6 months ago, but the scars he left on her psyche were still fresh and bleeding. Michael was a mid-level floor manager at the logistics company. Charming, conventionally handsome, and utterly toxic. He had pursued Khloe initially because she helped him pass his certification exams, and he stayed because having a girlfriend with rock-bottom self-esteem meant he held all the power. "You're lucky I'm with you, Khloe," he used to tell her, casually pinching the soft flesh of her waist as they sat on her worn-out sofa. "Nobody else is going to look twice at a girl your size. You have a pretty face, but you really need to try harder." When she finally gathered the courage to leave him after catching him in bed with one of the thin, blonde receptionists, he had laughed in her face. "Good luck dying alone, Shamu," he had sneered. Those words echoed in her head on a rainy Tuesday evening in November. The office was empty. The clock on the wall read 8:45 p.m. Khloe was the only one left, a half-eaten container of cold lo mein sitting next to her glowing monitors. She was running a routine audit on the quarterly shipping manifests when she noticed something terrifying. There was a massive hole in the accounts. It wasn't a simple clerical error. Someone had been siphoning money through ghost companies using offshore tax havens. The numbers were staggering. Over $4 million was missing from the reserve accounts. As Khloe dug deeper, her heart hammered against her ribs. The authorization signatures belonged to David Berman and Michael Reed. She knew Harbor Point Logistics wasn't a normal company. Rumors had always circulated around the water cooler that the firm was a front for the Gallo family, one of the most violent and powerful mafia syndicates in the Midwest. If the owners found out about this embezzlement, David and Michael wouldn't just be fired. They would be found floating in Lake Michigan. Panic gripped her. Despite how Michael had destroyed her self-worth, she didn't want him dead. Her hands shook as she started typing. Operating purely on adrenaline, Khloe spent the next 5 hours restructuring the ledgers. She created a brilliant, highly complex fiscal firewall, temporarily covering the missing funds by reallocating projected first-quarter losses and burying the deficit in a labyrinth of legitimate operational costs. It wouldn't hold forever, but it would buy Michael enough time to put the money back if she warned him. She hit save at 2 a.m., exhausted, sweating, and completely unaware that her keystrokes were being monitored in real time by the true owner of Harbor Point Logistics. Miles away, in a fortified estate in Lake Forest, Vincent Gallo sat in his study. Vincent was 34, a towering, broad-shouldered man with eyes like crushed coal and a reputation that made hardened criminals cross the street. He was reviewing the digital security logs when the red flags disappeared, expertly smoothed over by a ghost in his system. He narrowed his eyes at the screen. The financial manipulation was nothing short of genius. It was a masterpiece of forensic accounting. "Find out who logged into the terminal at Desk 4B tonight," Vincent ordered his underboss, Thomas "Tommy" Rinaldi, who was standing quietly by the door. 10 minutes later, Tommy returned with a personnel file. "Her name is Khloe Anderson, senior accountant, clean record. Quiet." Tommy hesitated, placing a printed ID photo on the mahogany desk. "She doesn't look like our usual problem solvers, boss." Vincent picked up the photo. He saw a woman with round, flushed cheeks, terrified blue eyes, and a soft, kind face. He didn't see the weight the rest of the world judged her for. He saw a brilliant mind and a woman who had just inadvertently walked into the lion's den. "Keep an eye on her," Vincent murmured, his thumb tracing the edge of the photograph. "And look into whoever she was trying to protect." 2 weeks passed. The anxiety of what she had done gnawed at Khloe's stomach, making her physically ill. She had tried to confront Michael about the missing money, pulling him into an empty break room. "Michael, I know about the 4 million, she had whispered frantically. "I covered it in the Q4 ledgers, but you have to put it back. The people who own this company, they will kill you." Michael had gone pale, then immediately turned vicious, shoving her hard against the vending machine. "You stupid cow, you think you're so smart. You just made yourself an accessory. Keep your mouth shut, or I'll tell them you masterminded the whole thing." Khloe had fled the break room in tears, realizing her mercy had only trapped her. It all came to a head on a freezing Friday night. Michael called her, his voice trembling and desperate. "Khloe, please, you have to meet me. I have the money, but I need you to show me how to put it back into the ghost accounts without triggering the audit software. Please, I'm begging you. If you don't help me, I'm dead." Against her better judgment, her empathy won out. He texted her an address, an abandoned warehouse district down by the shipping canals. She took a ride share, wrapping her heavy winter coat tightly around her plush frame, shivering from both the biting wind and sheer terror. When she stepped into the dimly lit, cavernous warehouse, the smell of rust and stale water hit her. Michael wasn't alone. He was kneeling on the concrete floor, his face bruised and bleeding. Surrounding him were 5 men in tailored suits. Khloe froze, her breath catching in her throat. She tried to back away, but the heavy metal door slammed shut behind her, locked by a guard she hadn't seen. "Ah, the cavalry has arrived." A smooth, dark voice echoed through the warehouse. From the shadows emerged Vincent Gallo. He was dressed in a bespoke charcoal suit that emphasized his lethal build. He moved with the slow, deliberate grace of an apex predator. As he stepped into the overhead light, Khloe felt the air leave her lungs. He was terrifyingly handsome, but the cold, dead look in his eyes made her want to sink into the floor. "Mr. Gallo, please," Michael sobbed, groveling on the concrete. "I told you I didn't steal it. It was her. She's the accountant. She set up the offshore accounts. Look at her. She's pathetic. She did it because she's obsessed with me, because she knows no one else will ever touch a fat pig like her." Khloe felt a hot tear slide down her cheek. Even now, with his life on the line, Michael was using her weight as a weapon, throwing her under the bus to save his own skin. She closed her eyes, preparing for the bullet, feeling nothing but a profound, crushing exhaustion. She was tired of being the punching bag. Vincent stopped walking. He looked down at Michael, then slowly turned his gaze to Khloe. He took in her trembling, full-figured silhouette, the tears on her pale cheeks, and the absolute resignation in her posture. "You expect me to believe," Vincent said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, silken whisper, "that a woman with the intellect to bypass 3 layers of military-grade encryption in under 5 hours manipulated millions of dollars just to impress a sniveling, incompetent rat like you?" Michael blinked, spitting blood. "Yes, she's desperate." Vincent didn't even look back as he drew a suppressed pistol from his jacket and shot Michael in the kneecap. Michael's agonizing scream tore through the warehouse. Khloe gasped, clamping her hands over her mouth, her entire heavy body shaking violently. "Silence," Vincent commanded softly. The warehouse immediately fell quiet, save for Michael's pathetic whimpering. Vincent walked slowly toward Khloe. She instinctively shrank back, pressing her wide shoulders against the cold metal door, trying to make herself as small as possible. But Vincent didn't raise his weapon. He stopped 2 feet away, towering over her. He reached out, and Khloe flinched, screwing her eyes shut. But the touch was shockingly gentle. Vincent's large, warm hand cupped her jaw. He brushed away a tear that had fallen onto her cheek. "Open your eyes, Mia Colomba, my dove," he murmured. Khloe opened her eyes, looking up into the dark, intense depths of the Mafia boss's gaze. There was no disgust in his eyes. There was no pity. There was a raw, burning fascination that made her heart stutter. "I have been watching you, Khloe," Vincent said quietly, ensuring only she could hear him over Michael's groans. "I saw what you did to my ledgers. I saw the genius it took to save this worthless worm's life. And I have heard the way he speaks to you." He stepped closer, invading her space, the scent of bergamot and expensive leather wrapping around her. "You are not an accessory to his theft. You are the only reason he lasted this long." Vincent turned his head slightly toward his men. "Take out the trash. Recover what's left of my money. Put him in the river." "No," Khloe cried out, her voice cracking. "Please don't kill him. I'll pay it back. I'll work for you for the rest of my life. Just please don't kill him because of me." Vincent looked back at her, a strange mixture of awe and anger crossing his features. "He humiliated you. He betrayed you. And still, your heart bleeds for him?" "I don't want anyone's blood on my hands," she sobbed, clutching the fabric of her coat. Vincent stared at her for a long moment. Finally he nodded. "Break his other leg and drop him off at Cook County Hospital. If he ever returns to Chicago, bury him." His men dragged the sobbing Michael away. Vincent turned back to Khloe, taking her arm gently but firmly. "Come with me." "Where are you taking me?" She panicked, her heavy boots stumbling over the concrete. "Am I going to jail?" "No, Khloe," Vincent said, leading her toward a sleek, black SUV waiting in the alley. "You are coming home with me. You belong to the Gallo family now." For the first few weeks, Khloe felt like she was living inside a terrifying fever dream. Vincent had brought her to his sprawling, fortress-like estate on the shores of Lake Michigan. It was a masterpiece of modern architecture, guarded by men with assault rifles and surrounded by high stone walls. She wasn't a prisoner. Not exactly. She had a massive, luxurious bedroom with silk sheets, a marble bathroom larger than her entire apartment, and a stunning view of the frozen lake. She was allowed to walk the grounds, read in the expansive library, and eat whatever she wanted from the estate's private chef. But she wasn't allowed to leave. "It's for your protection," Vincent had told her on her first morning there, sitting across from her at a grand dining table. Michael owed money to other people too. Bad people. "Until I clean up his mess, you stay here. Furthermore, you work for me now, as my personal financial advisor." Khloe had expected to be treated like a hostage or a slave. Instead, she was treated with a bizarre, almost reverent level of respect by everyone in the house. The guards addressed her as Miss Anderson. The chef learned her favorite comfort foods, macaroni and cheese with truffles, rich chocolate lava cakes, roasted duck, and prepared them without the slightest hint of judgment. But the lack of judgment from others didn't stop the judgment from within. Khloe's insecurities were deeply ingrained, carved into her soul by a lifetime of societal rejection. Being in this opulent world only magnified her feelings of inadequacy. The women she occasionally saw visiting the estate, wives and girlfriends of Vincent's associates, were universally stunning. They were razor-thin, draped in designer couture, with sharp cheekbones and perfect hair. Whenever Khloe walked past them in the hallways, wearing her oversized generic sweaters and stretchy leggings, she felt like a swamp creature that had accidentally wandered into a palace. Vincent, however, was a constant, confusing presence. He spent hours with her in his study every day. They would sit side by side at his massive desk, poring over the financial portfolios of his legitimate businesses. He listened to her. He valued her input. When she suggested a restructuring of his real estate assets to minimize tax liability, he implemented it immediately. And then there were the looks. Khloe would often catch Vincent staring at her when he thought she wasn't paying attention. His gaze was heavy, dark, and possessive. It made her skin flush and her stomach flutter, but she ruthlessly squashed the feeling. "Don't be an idiot," she told herself 100 times a day. "He's keeping you around because you're useful, because you're a human calculator. He's a billionaire mafia boss. He could have any supermodel in the world. He's not looking at you like that." The breaking point happened 1 month into her stay. Vincent was hosting a gala at the estate to celebrate a major merger of his construction fronts. Hundreds of Chicago's elite, politicians, businessmen, and high-ranking syndicate members were invited. 2 days before the event, an older woman arrived at Khloe's room with a tape measure. "Mr. Gallo has requested that I tailor a gown for you for the gala, Miss Anderson," the seamstress said with a polite smile. Khloe froze. "A gown? No, I can't attend. I don't go to events." "Mr. Gallo was very specific," the woman insisted gently. The fitting was a nightmare. Khloe hated being measured. Hearing the large numbers called out made her feel sick with shame. When the dress finally arrived on the evening of the gala, it was undeniably magnificent. A deep emerald green velvet off-the-shoulder gown. But when Khloe put it on and looked in the full-length mirror, all she saw were her flaws. The velvet clung to her thick arms. It highlighted the roundness of her belly and the width of her hips. She looked like a fat girl playing dress-up. Downstairs, The music was playing, and the low hum of elegant conversation floated up the stairs. Khloe suddenly felt a panic attack rising in her chest. She couldn't do it. She couldn't walk into a room full of those thin, perfect people and subject herself to their whispers and sneers. She couldn't embarrass Vincent like that. She frantically tried to reach the zipper on the back of the dress to take it off, but her fingers slipped. Tears welled up in her eyes, spilling over her lashes. The heavy mahogany door to her bedroom clicked open. "Khloe?" Vincent's deep voice called out. "My guests are waiting to meet." He stopped dead in his tracks. He was wearing a custom black tuxedo, looking like a dark god carved from marble. He took in the sight of her standing in front of the mirror, shaking, her face streaked with tears, tugging uselessly at the back of the stunning emerald gown. "What is wrong?" he asked, his voice instantly dropping its formal tone, laced with genuine alarm. He crossed the room in 3 long strides. "I can't go down there," Khloe choked out, taking a step back from him. "I can't. Please don't make me, Vincent." Vincent stopped, his brow furrowing deeply. "Why? Are you ill?" "I'm humiliating," she burst out, the dam finally breaking. Years of pent-up shame and self-hatred poured out of her in a rush of agonizing words. "Look at me. Look at this dress on me. I look ridiculous. Your friends and your associates are down there, and they're going to laugh at you for having a beast like me living in your house." Vincent's face darkened, a flash of terrifying anger crossing his features, but it wasn't directed at her. "I don't belong in this world, Vincent," she sobbed, backing up against the vanity. "I'm not like the women you know. I'm not beautiful. I'm not elegant. I'm just a fat girl." The room went dead silent. The music from downstairs seemed a million miles away. Vincent closed the distance between them. He didn't hesitate. He didn't look at her with pity. He stepped right into her personal space, his massive frame dwarfing hers. He reached up, his rough hands gently gripping her thick shoulders, his thumbs tracing the bare skin left exposed by the velvet neckline. "Look at me," he commanded softly. Khloe shook her head, staring at the floor, crying openly. "Khloe, look at me." She slowly raised her tear-filled blue eyes to meet his. "If any person in that room downstairs dares to look at you with anything less than absolute worship, I will burn their houses to the ground by dawn," Vincent said, his voice vibrating with a terrifying sincerity. He moved his hands up to cup her wet cheeks, his thumbs wiping away the tears. "You think I see a beast?" he whispered, his eyes dark with an intense, burning passion she had never seen before. "From the moment I saw your photograph, I saw a queen. You have a mind that commands empires, and a heart so soft it breaks for the men who wrong you. The women down there, they are made of plastic and glass. They shatter. You—" His gaze dropped to her mouth, then traced the soft curves of her body clad in the velvet, his expression one of pure, unadulterated hunger. "You are magnificent," Vincent breathed, stepping closer until his chest brushed against hers. "You are my whole world, and I will spend the rest of my life making you believe it." Vincent did not just walk Khloe down the grand, sweeping staircase of the estate. He paraded her. As they descended into the glittering ballroom, the string quartet's music seemed to falter for a fraction of a second. Hundreds of eyes turned upward. Khloe's breath hitched, her instinct screaming at her to shrink, to hide her heavy arms and wide hips behind the marble balustrade. But Vincent's hand moved from her waist to firmly grip her lower back, a silent, unyielding anchor of support. "Head high, Mia Colomba," he murmured against her temple, his voice a low rumble. Let them look at their new reality. The silence in the room was palpable, but it wasn't the mocking, disgusted silence Khloe had anticipated. It was the breathless silence of survival. Every made man, every socialite, and every ruthless businessman in the room saw the way Vincent Gallo looked at the woman on his arm. They saw the territorial clench of his jaw and the lethal warning in his dark eyes. This was not a passing fling. This was a coronation. Khloe stepped off the final stair, her emerald velvet gown sweeping across the polished floor. To her shock, the crowd parted like the Red Sea. Men bowed their heads respectfully. Women offered tight, nervous smiles. For the first time in her life, Khloe wasn't the invisible fat girl taking up too much space. She was the center of gravity. Vincent led her to the VIP section, a raised alcove cordoned off by velvet ropes. Sitting there on a leather sofa was Declan O'Connor, the ruthless head of the West Side Irish Syndicate, a key ally and occasional rival of the Gallo family. Declan was a sharp-featured man with cold eyes and a cruel smile. Sitting beside him was his much younger wife, a blonde ex-model who looked like she subsisted entirely on champagne and celery. "Vincent!" Declan boomed, standing up and extending a hand. "A hell of a party. And who is this unique vision?" Declan's eyes raked over Khloe's full figure. It was a micro-expression, lasting barely a second. But Khloe recognized it instantly. The subtle, aristocratic sneer of a man who equated weight with weakness. Vincent didn't shake Declan's hand. He simply stared at it until the Irish boss awkwardly lowered his arm. "This is Miss Khloe Anderson," Vincent said, his voice carrying the dangerous calm of a dormant volcano. "My partner, in all things." Declan chuckled nervously, trying to recover his footing. "Partner, eh? I didn't realize the Gallo family was diversifying its portfolio into softer assets." The temperature in the alcove plummeted. Tommy Rinaldi, standing a few feet away, discreetly unbuttoned his suit jacket, his hand hovering near his holster. Khloe felt a familiar spike of shame, but as she looked at Vincent, she saw his eyes darken to absolute midnight. He was about to order Declan's execution right there in the ballroom. She could see the violence unfurling in his shoulders. Before Vincent could speak, Khloe placed a gentle, grounding hand on his chest. Then she turned her bright blue eyes to Declan. "We are diversifying, Mr. O'Connor," Khloe said, her voice surprisingly steady, ringing clear over the background music. "For instance, I was reviewing the joint import ledgers this morning. It seems your shipping fronts at the South Docks have been bleeding revenue for the last 3 quarters. A 7% deficit in logistics alone." Declan's smug smile vanished. "Excuse me." "You're losing money," Khloe continued, her accounting brain taking over, banishing her insecurities. "You've been masking the losses by inflating the overhead on your warehouse leases, but the depreciation on your transport fleet doesn't match the tax write-offs. At this rate, your syndicate will be insolvent in 18 months. Perhaps you should focus less on my softness and more on your own operational margins." The alcove went deathly silent. Declan's wife gasped. Tommy Rinaldi let out a low, impressed whistle. Declan turned an ugly shade of red, his mouth opening and closing like a landed fish. He looked at Vincent, expecting the Mafia boss to rein in his woman. Instead, Vincent threw his head back and let out a genuine, booming laugh that echoed across the ballroom. He pulled Khloe flush against his side, his chest vibrating with dark amusement. "You heard the lady, Declan. Vincent said, his eyes glittering with lethal pride. Her math is never wrong. Get your house in order, or I'll have Khloe buy out your debts and own you by Christmas. Vincent didn't wait for a response. He turned Khloe away, leading her onto the center of the dance floor. He pulled her flush against his solid body, intertwining his fingers with hers. I have never, Vincent whispered, his lips brushing her ear, been more turned on in my entire life. Khloe blushed a deep, furious crimson, but a bright, genuine smile broke across her face. For the rest of the night, as they swayed to the music, she didn't think about the tightness of her dress or the width of her waist. She only thought about the way Vincent's hands held her, like she was the most precious, powerful thing in the world. 3 months later, the golden cage had transformed into a command center. Khloe had officially taken over the entirety of the Gallo family's financial operations. She had moved out of her guest room and into Vincent's master suite. They were inseparable. The men who had once looked at her with confusion now brought her their operational budgets with the utmost reverence. She was no longer just the boss's obsession. She was the architect of their wealth. But with great power came a massive target on her back. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Vincent had been called away to a sit-down with the regional bosses in Detroit, leaving Khloe at the Chicago estate with a heavily armed security detail. She was in Vincent's study, reviewing the physical cash flow ledgers for a chain of underground casinos managed by one of Vincent's oldest capos, a man named Simon Caldwell. Khloe adjusted her glasses, frowning at the leather-bound book. Something was deeply wrong. The digital numbers matched perfectly, but the physical drop logs from the casino floors showed a discrepancy. Someone was skimming off the top, millions in untraceable cash, and the trail led directly to Simon. She picked up the encrypted landline to call Tommy Rinaldi, but the line was dead. Frowning, Khloe pulled out her cell phone. No signal. A cold spike of dread hit her stomach. The estate was equipped with military-grade cell towers. A signal drop meant a localized jammer had been activated. Suddenly, the heavy oak doors of the study burst open. 4 men stepped into the room. They weren't wearing the standard Gallo security suits. They wore tactical gear. At the center of the group was Simon Caldwell, his silver hair slicked back, a suppressed pistol in his hand. "Miss Anderson," Simon said, his voice dripping with false politeness. "Working hard, I see." Khloe's heart hammered against her ribs. Her security detail, she had seen at least 6 men outside the study just an hour ago. "Where are my guards, Simon?" she demanded, forcing her voice to remain steady, though her hands trembled beneath the mahogany desk. "Taking a long nap," Simon smirked, stepping fully into the room and locking the doors behind him. "Nothing fatal. Just a little sedative in the coffee urn. I can't afford a war with Vincent, but I also can't afford you." He walked toward the desk, tapping the barrel of his gun against the physical ledger she had been reading. "You see, Khloe, the old accountant was an idiot. He didn't ask questions. But you're too smart for your own good. You dug too deep." Simon sneered, looking down at her sitting in Vincent's massive leather chair. "Vincent lost his mind putting a fat civilian liability in charge of our money. He's thinking with his... Well, he's not thinking. The other capos agree with me. We're taking our cut, and we're taking our family back. If you kill me, Vincent will peel your skin off while you're still breathing," Khloe said, clutching the edge of the desk. "Oh, I'm not going to kill you." Simon smiled a terrible, thin smile. "You're going to disappear. We're going to make it look like you realized you were out of your depth, stole 10 million from the digital reserves, and ran away. A classic tale of a gold digger panicking. It will break Vincent's heart, but it won't trigger a Mafia war." He gestured to his men, Grab her, and bring the ledgers." Two burly mercenaries stepped forward, reaching for Khloe's arms. "Think," Khloe's mind screamed. "You are not a victim anymore. You are a gallows." As the first man reached for her, Khloe's hand shot under the desk, slamming her palm onto the silent panic button Vincent had installed specifically for her. But she didn't just press the button. She grabbed the heavy, solid gold paperweight from Vincent's desk, a gift from a Russian oligarch, and hurled it with all her strength directly at the mercenary's face. The heavy gold connected with a sickening crack, shattering the man's nose. He howled, stumbling backward and dropping his weapon. "You bitch!" Simon roared, raising his gun. Khloe dove under the heavy mahogany desk just as two suppressed bullets thudded into the leather chair where her head had been a second before. The study's alarm system finally triggered, a deafening siren echoing through the estate, flashing red strobe lights filling the room. "Get her out from under there, now!" Simon shouted over the alarm, panicking as the estate's automated steel lockdown shutters began slamming down over the windows. A mercenary grabbed Khloe's ankle, yanking her out from under the desk. She kicked wildly, her heavy boot connecting with the man's knee, but he was too strong. He dragged her across the Persian rug, twisting her arm behind her back. "Enough!" Simon barked, pressing the cold barrel of his gun against her temple. "Open the security doors from the terminal, Khloe, or I blow your brains out and take my chances with Vincent." Khloe panted, her cheek pressed against the carpet. The steel shutters had locked them in, but it also meant Simon couldn't get out. "Go to hell," she spat. Simon cocked the gun. "Have it your way." Suddenly, a massive explosion shook the foundation of the estate. The heavy oak doors of the study didn't just open. They were blown off their hinges by a breaching charge, sending splinters of wood flying into the room. Through the smoke and the flashing red lights, a terrifying silhouette stepped into the doorway. Vincent hadn't gone to Detroit. He was holding a tactical shotgun, his bespoke suit covered in plaster dust, his eyes burning with a rage so absolute, so demonic, that even Simon's mercenaries froze in terror. Behind him stood Tommy Rinaldi and a dozen heavily armed Gallo enforcers. "Let her go," Vincent whispered. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the blaring alarm like a razor. Simon, trembling, kept the gun pressed to Khloe's head. "Vincent, listen to me. She's poisoning the family. She's a rat." Vincent didn't hesitate. He didn't negotiate. In a blur of motion, he raised the shotgun and fired. The slug tore through the shoulder of the mercenary, holding Khloe down, sending the man flying backward into the bookshelves. Simultaneously, Tommy Rinaldi fired a single shot from his sidearm, blowing Simon Caldwell's kneecap clean off. Simon screamed, collapsing to the floor and dropping his weapon. The remaining mercenaries immediately dropped their guns, raising their hands in surrender. Vincent dropped his shotgun. He crossed the room in a second, falling to his knees beside Khloe. He pulled her into his massive chest, his large hands frantically checking her for bullet wounds, running his fingers through her hair, cupping her face. "Khloe, amore mio, are you hit? Are you bleeding?" he demanded, his voice shaking with a vulnerability he had never shown to another living soul. "I'm okay," Khloe sobbed, burying her face in his neck, inhaling the scent of gunpowder and bergamot. "I'm okay. I hit him with the paperweight." Vincent let out a ragged breath, pressing a fierce, desperate kiss to her forehead. He held her tight, his heart pounding against hers. Slowly, Vincent stood up, pulling Khloe up with him and tucking her safely behind his broad back. He looked down at Simon, who was writhing on the floor in a pool of his own blood. "Tommy," Vincent said, his voice returning to that chilling, emotionless void. "Take the mercenaries to the warehouse. As for Simon—" Vincent looked back at Khloe, his eyes softening just a fraction. "What did you find in those ledgers, my queen?" Khloe stood tall, her fear evaporating, replaced by the cold, calculated strength she had learned from the man standing beside her. "He stole $8.4 million from the Southside casinos," Khloe stated, staring down at the bleeding capo. "He routed it through a shell corporation in the Caymans." Vincent nodded slowly. He looked back at Simon. "You made 2 mistakes today, Simon. You stole from my family. But worse, you insulted my wife." Simon's eyes widened in horror. "Wife?" Vincent didn't elaborate. He simply turned his back on the traitor, wrapping his arm protectively around Khloe's thick waist. "Take him to the basement," Vincent ordered his men, "and make sure he stays awake for all of it." The heavy steel doors of the estate's underground safe room hissed shut, sealing Khloe and Vincent in absolute silence. Above them, the cleanup crew was already scrubbing the blood from the Persian rugs. But down here, in the impenetrable concrete bunker, the world faded away. Vincent didn't move toward the weapons racks or the communication consoles. He collapsed onto the edge of the leather sofa, pulling Khloe down by her hips so she stood directly between his spread knees. His large hands gripped her thick waist like a lifeline, his head resting against her stomach. For the first time since she had met the ruthless head of the Chicago syndicate, Vincent Gallo looked utterly exhausted. He was trembling. Khloe gently ran her fingers through his dark, plaster-dusted hair. The adrenaline was fading, leaving a dull ache in her muscles, but her mind was sharper than ever. "I told you I was okay, Vincent," she whispered, stroking his cheek. Vincent looked up, his dark eyes shining with an emotion so raw it made her breath catch. "When I saw the security feed drop, when I realized my men had been compromised and you were alone in that study." He swallowed hard, his jaw tightening. "I have ordered hits, I have dismantled cartels, and I have faced down federal indictments without my pulse rising. But in that car ride back from the private airstrip, Khloe, I felt fear. Real, paralyzing fear. If he had pulled that trigger." He didn't finish the sentence. Instead, he pulled her down, burying his face in her neck, holding her heavy, soft body against his solid muscle as if trying to fuse them together. "You called me your wife," Khloe murmured into his shoulder, her heart pounding. Vincent pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. He reached into the inner pocket of his ruined tuxedo jacket. He didn't pull out a velvet box. Instead, he withdrew a thick, folded piece of parchment paper, sealed with the official stamp of the state of Illinois. "I didn't just call you my wife to scare Simon," Vincent said softly, unfolding the document. "Look at it." Khloe's eyes scanned the legal document. It was a transfer of ownership. Vincent had legally transferred 51% of the Gallo family's legitimate holdings, the real estate, the shipping fronts, the construction conglomerates, directly into her name. She wasn't just a partner in name. She was the majority shareholder of a $3 billion empire. "Vincent," she gasped, her hands shaking as she touched the paper. "This is... You gave me the keys to everything. Why?" "Because an empire is only as strong as its queen," Vincent said, his voice a low, reverent rumble. He reached up, tracing the soft curve of her jawline. "For a month, I have watched you rebuild my world. You didn't just fix my ledgers, Khloe. You fixed me. You are the most brilliant, beautiful creature I have ever known. I don't want a piece of paper to own you. I want this paper to prove that you own me. Completely." He slipped off the sofa, Dropping to one knee on the cold concrete floor, he took her left hand, kissing her knuckles. "Marry me, Khloe. Let me spend the rest of my days worshipping the ground you walk on." Tears streamed down Khloe's round cheeks, but this time they weren't tears of shame. They were tears of absolute, unadulterated triumph. She looked down at this terrifying, powerful man who commanded armies, kneeling before a woman the rest of the world had told to hide. "Yes," she sobbed, pulling him up by his lapels and crashing her lips against his. "Yes, Vincent." But their moment of peace was fleeting. Khloe's brilliant mind, the same mind that had saved the Empire, was already spinning with the puzzle pieces Simon had left behind. An hour later, they were back in the restored study. Tommy Rinaldi stood by the door, nursing a bruised shoulder. "Simon is singing," Tommy reported grimly, "but he's not the mastermind, boss. He doesn't have the brains to set up a Cayman shell corporation, let alone bypass our internal security grid. Someone backed his play. Someone gave him the mercenaries." Khloe was sitting at the desk, her fingers flying across the mechanical keyboard as she traced the routing numbers Simon had used. Lines of code reflected in her glasses. "Tommy is right," Khloe said, her voice dropping into the cold, clinical tone of a predator tracking its prey. Simon used a ghost server in Zurich to bounce the funds, but he made a mistake. He used the same IP address to access a private server at the First Continental Bank of Boston. Vincent stepped behind her, resting his heavy hands on her shoulders. Boston. Nathaniel Hayes. Nathaniel Hayes was the vicious, blue-blooded head of the New England Syndicate. He had been encroaching on the Gallo family's Midwest territories for years, trying to disrupt their shipping lines. "Hayes bankrolled the coup," Vincent growled, his grip tightening on Khloe's shoulders. "He thought with me distracted by you, and Simon betraying me from the inside, the city would fall. I'm going to declare war. I'll send a strike team to Massachusetts tonight." "No," Khloe said sharply, stopping Vincent in his tracks. Both Vincent and Tommy looked at her in surprise. Khloe spun the leather chair around, adjusting her glasses. The soft, terrified girl who had cried in a warehouse was entirely gone. In her place sat the ruthless matriarch of the Chicago outfit. "Bullets will just start a blood feud that will cost us millions and put our people in the crosshairs of the FBI, Khloe said, her blue eyes icy. "Nathaniel Hayes thinks I'm a weakness. He thinks I'm just some naive, fat girl you picked up to play accountant. Let him think that. We aren't going to shoot him, Vincent. We are going to bleed him dry." Vincent's lips curled into a slow, wicked smile. "What do you have in mind, Mia Colomba?" "Hayes's entire empire relies on leverage," Khloe explained, turning back to the monitors. "He uses his shipping ports in Boston to collateralize his loans with the offshore banks. But I've found a back door into his primary ledger. If I trigger a margin call by manipulating the perceived value of his shipping fleet, his creditors will demand immediate repayment. He'll be insolvent in 24 hours. "He'll panic," Tommy noted, catching on. "Exactly," Khloe smiled darkly. "He'll need cash immediately to avoid defaulting. And the only place he can get that kind of liquid capital fast enough is the emergency reserve he holds at the Palmer House Hilton private vault here in Chicago," Vincent finished, his eyes burning with pride as he looked at his fiancée. "I'll initiate the margin call at midnight," Khloe said. "By tomorrow afternoon, Hayes will be on a private jet to Chicago to manually withdraw his reserves. And when he opens that vault, we will be waiting." The private subterranean vault beneath the historic Palmer House Hilton was a relic of the Prohibition era, now used exclusively by the city's most elite criminal underworld. The walls were lined with safety deposit boxes the size of bank safes. At exactly 3 p.m. on a stormy Thursday, the heavy steel doors of the vault room hissed open. Nathaniel Hayes strode in, flanked by 4 massive bodyguards. Hayes was a tall, aristocratic man with licked-back blonde hair and a bespoke suit that screamed old money. He was sweating profusely, his usual arrogant demeanor cracked by the catastrophic financial meltdown his empire had suffered overnight. Banks were seizing his assets. His capos were demanding answers. He needed the $50 million in untraceable bearer bonds sitting in box 402 to survive the week. "Open it," Hayes snapped at the trembling vault manager. The manager inserted the dual keys and spun the heavy wheel. The door of box 402 creaked open. Hayes reached inside. His hand closed around empty air. He froze. He dropped to his knees, frantically staring into the massive metal box. It was completely empty, save for a single, crisp manila folder lying on the steel floor. "Looking for something, Nathaniel?" A deep voice echoed through the cavernous vault. Hayes spun around. From the shadows of the adjacent aisle stepped Vincent Gallo. He wasn't alone. Tommy Rinaldi and a dozen Gallo enforcers stepped out from the perimeter, their weapons drawn and leveled at Hayes's bodyguards, who wisely kept their hands away from their holsters. But Vincent wasn't leading the charge. Walking slightly ahead of him, her heels clicking authoritatively against the marble floor, was Khloe. She wore a custom-tailored, stark white power suit that hugged her wide hips and accentuated her curves perfectly. A blood-red silk blouse peeked out from the lapels. She looked lethal. She looked like a queen. "Gallo!" Hayes spat, his face turning purple with rage. "You stole my bonds!" "I didn't steal anything," Vincent said calmly, stepping aside to let Khloe take the floor. "My wife simply relocated them. Consider it a tax for sending mercenaries into our home." Hayes stared at Khloe, his eyes raking over her full figure with absolute venom. "So this is the famous accountant, the fat little pig who thinks she can play with the big dogs. You think you're smart, bitch. I have politicians in my pocket. I'll have you both buried under federal indictments before the week is out." Khloe didn't flinch. She didn't shrink. She walked right up to Hayes, who was still kneeling on the floor by the empty safe. She looked down at him, her expression one of utter pity. "You don't have politicians in your pocket anymore, Nathaniel," Khloe said, her voice smooth and chilling. She gestured to the manila folder inside the empty safe. "Open it." Hayes glared at her, then snatched the folder, ripping it open. He stared at the documents inside, his arrogant face draining of all color. "At 2 a.m. this morning, after I triggered your margin call, your offshore creditors panicked," Khloe explained calmly, adjusting her glasses. "They sold off your debt to the highest bidder to recoup their losses. I was the highest bidder." Hayes's hands began to shake. No, that's impossible. The Cayman banks don't sell to. They sell to whoever has the liquidity," Khloe interrupted, her voice snapping like a whip. "And thanks to the $8 million Simon tried to steal from us, which I successfully intercepted and reinvested into high-yield, short-term commodities last week, the Gallo family had plenty of liquidity. We bought your debt, Nathaniel. All of it." She leaned down slightly, her blue eyes piercing his soul. "I own your shipping ports. I own your distribution centers. I even own the deed to your historic mansion in Beacon Hill. You are entirely, legally, and permanently bankrupt." Hayes let out a strangled cry, lunging forward, but before he could even clear the floor, Vincent was there. The Mafia boss grabbed Hayes by the throat, lifting the aristocratic rival off his feet and slamming him brutally against the steel wall of the vault. "You look at her when she speaks to you, but you do not move," Vincent growled, his grip tightening until Hayes's face turned blue. "Let him down, Vincent," Khloe said softly. "He's not worth the effort." Vincent dropped him. Hayes collapsed to the marble floor, gasping for air, utterly broken. The Great Boston Syndicate had not been dismantled by a gang war or a hail of bullets. It had been dismantled by a size 24 accountant with a brilliant mind and an unbreakable spirit. "Leave Chicago," Khloe told the gasping man on the floor. "If you ever cross into our territory again, I won't just take your money. I'll take your freedom. The FBI would love to see the unredacted ledgers I have saved on my encrypted drive." She turned away, linking her arm through Vincent's. "Let's go home, darling. We have a wedding to plan." 6 months later, the private gardens of the Gallo estate were transformed into a paradise of white roses and glittering crystal. Khloe stood in front of the floor-to-length mirror in the master suite. She was wearing a custom-designed wedding gown of ivory lace and silk tulle. It wasn't designed to hide her body. It was designed to celebrate it. The corset hugged her full breasts and cinched her wide waist, flowing out into a dramatic, sweeping train. Her hair was pinned up in an elegant chignon, diamonds sparkling at her throat. She looked at her reflection. For the first time in her 28 years on Earth, the voice in her head that whispered, "You are too big, you are too much, you are ugly," was completely, entirely silent. She wasn't just beautiful, she was powerful. The door opened and Vincent stepped in. He was wearing a classic black tuxedo, looking more handsome and dangerous than ever. But when his eyes landed on her, the danger melted away, leaving only pure, unrestrained adoration. He walked up behind her, wrapping his massive arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. He pressed a kiss to her bare shoulder, looking at their reflection in the mirror together. "Are you ready, Mrs. Gallo?" he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I am," Khloe smiled, leaning back into his warmth. "Do you know what I see when I look at this mirror?" Vincent asked softly, his dark eyes meeting hers in the glass. "A fat girl who hijacked your empire?" she teased gently. Vincent chuckled, a deep, rumbling sound that vibrated against her spine. He turned her around so she was facing him, cupping her face in his hands, just as he had done in that dirty warehouse so many months ago. "I see the woman who saved my life," Vincent said, his voice ringing with absolute truth. "I see the woman who brought a king to his knees. I see my whole world." Ooh. And as he kissed her, sealing their vows before they even walked down the aisle, Khloe knew he was right. She was no longer hiding in the shadows. She was the Queen of Chicago, and she was going to rule the world. Did Khloe and Vincent's incredible story leave you completely breathless? If you loved this tale of a brilliant plus-size queen rising to power and bringing a ruthless Mafia boss to his knees, you won't want to miss our next story. Love comes in all shapes and sizes, and true power is always in the mind. Hit that like button if you believe in Khloe's fierce revenge. Share this video with someone who loves a dramatic romance twist. And subscribe to our channel for more thrilling, real-life inspired audio dramas.